In 1848, Italians took arms against the occupying Habsburg authorities, which led to the First Italian War of Independence throughout northern Italy, causing the death of over 6,000 men from both sides. These revolts were brutally crushed, but not the idea of a united Italy, present amongst the Italians who demanded political liberalization from the conservative leadership of the Austrians and popular sovereignty. French Emperor Napoleon III was interested in the Italian cause, and in an agreement made with the Piedmonts, he supported them in a war with Austria, aiming to weaken the old rivals. In this multi-part series, we are going to look over the Second Italian War of Independence, from the joint Franco-Sardinian affair to the infamous Battle of Solferino and the armistice of Francovilla, which was a preliminary move in the Italian unification. The Piedmontese, following their defeat by Austria in the First Italian War of Independence, recognized their need for allies. That led Prime Minister Camillo Benso, Count of Cavour, to attempt to establish relations with other European powers, partially through Piedmont's participation in the Crimean War. In the peace conference at Paris after the Crimean War, Cavour attempted to bring attention to efforts for Italian unification. He found Britain and France to be sympathetic, but refusing to go against Austrian wishes, as any movement towards Italian independence would threaten Austria's territory of Lombardy-Venetia. Private talks between Napoleon III and Cavour after the conference identified the French Emperor as the most likely candidate to aid Italy, although he was still uncommitted. On the 14th of January 1858, Felice Orsini, an Italian, led an attempt on Napoleon III's life. The assassination attempt brought widespread sympathy for the Italian unity and had a profound effect on Napoleon himself, who now was determined to help Piedmont against Austria to defuse the wider revolutionary activities, which governments in Italy might later allow to happen. After his election as president in 1848, Napoleon Charles Louis, nephew of the infamous Napoleon Bonaparte, became the leader of France and gained full power in 1851 after a coup. He was a popular monarch who oversaw the modernization and had the goal to expand the influence of the Second French Empire, and also supported the creation of a united Italian state. Emperor Napoleon III was keen to settle the Italian question and to revise the humiliations of the 1815 Congress of Vienna. He had long ago formed the view that this required a war against Austria. War with Austria could bring France military success, delivering glory to France and humiliation to Austria. Actively supporting Italian nationalist aspirations would place France firmly on the side of what was then seen as progressive liberalism, and confirm the nation's special revolutionary credentials. For France, however, Italian independence and Italian political unification were two very different things. Political unification would have been contrary to French interests because it would have risked reducing French influence on the Italian peninsula. The secret alliance served both countries by helping with the Sardinian Piedmontese plan of unification of the Italian peninsula under the House of Savoy. It also weakened Austria, a fiery adversary of Napoleon III's French Second Empire. The Prime Minister of Piedmont Sardinia, Camillo Benso, Count of Cavour, was aware of the French objectives and was looking for an opportunity to serve these, while simultaneously achieving his goal of lifting the oppressive burden of Austrian rule from as many Italians as possible. The arrival in Turin of Jacques-Alexandre Bixio in April 1858 provided Cavour with his opportunity. Bixio was a retired physician, originally from Liguria, with a taste for politics and ballooning. He had made his life in France. Bixio was a friend both of Cavour and of Prince Napoleon Jérôme Bonaparte, cousin to the French Emperor. His presence in Turin was ostensibly part of a discreet European tour, visiting various European royal families to find a socially suitable wife for the emperor's cousin. Bixio was also able to pass to his friend, the Piedmontese chief minister, French proposals for an alliance of the two states against Austria. The agreement would be reinforced through the marriage of Princess Maria Clotilde of Savoy, daughter of the Piedmontese king, Victor Emmanuel II, to Prince Napoleon Bonaparte. Reflecting the international sensitivities involved, negotiations progressed outside the usual diplomatic channels. To confirm his approval of the proposal, Cavour sent his diplomat, Costantino Nigra, to Paris, where Nigra made contact with another friend and confidant of the emperor, and another physician, called Henry Queneau. On the 9th of May 1858, Queneau was able to confirm to Nigra that the alliance proposal had the full support of the emperor himself. Further talks now took place in Turin, involving Queneau, Cavour, and King Victor Emmanuel. At this point, a suggestion came from the emperor for a meeting between himself and Cavour at Plamières-les-Bains, a fashionable health resort in the small ravine of Augren in the Vosges, reassuringly far from Paris or Turin, and off the beaten track of those following international diplomacy and politics. The meeting itself took place on the 21st of July 1858, with a first 4-hour session starting at 11 o'clock and a second session running from 16 o'clock until 20 o'clock. It was a Tuesday. The venue was a moving one. The two men sat together, without support staff, in a small horse-drawn carriage. It undertook a slow passage round and round the little town. Cavour later reported to his king, "The emperor asked me what France would get in return for her military backing, and whether your majesty would hand over Savoy and Nice to France. I replied that your majesty supported the principle of nationalism, which included recognition that Savoy, by virtue of being French-speaking, should be united with France, even though it would cause your majesty untold unhappiness to renounce a territory that was the cradle of his own family." Regarding Nice, the situation was different, since the inhabitants of Nice had far more in common with the Piedmontese than with the French, and their incorporation into France would accordingly be entirely contrary to those very principles of nationalism underpinning the military triumph anticipated against Austria. Neither man wanted the blame for causing the impending war. Cavour noted that Napoleon began by stating that he was determined to support Piedmont-Sardinia with all his strength in a war against Austria, on the condition that the war was not in support of a revolutionary cause and could be justified in diplomatic terms and, more importantly, before public opinion in France and in Europe. The treaty creating a formal alliance was signed on 28-29 January 1859 at Turin by Victor Emmanuel II, and at Paris on the 26th of January 1859 by Napoleon III. Not everything agreed verbally at Plamières 6 months before surfaced in the treaty. It was silent on the geopolitical understandings covering central and southern Italy. On the military side, the treaty merely committed France to intervene alongside Piedmont-Sardinia in the event of aggression from Austria. In the event of any military actions, ending with the creation of a Kingdom of Alta Italia, the northern Italian kingdom envisaged at Plamières, France would be rewarded, receiving Savoy and Nice. On the 30th of January 1859, the marriage was celebrated at Turin between Prince Napoleon Bonaparte and Princess Maria Clotilde of Savoy. Cavour, being unable to get French help unless the Austrians attacked first, provoked Vienna by a series of military maneuvers close to the border. Sardinia mobilized its army on the 9th of March 1859. Austria mobilized on the 9th of April 1859 and issued an ultimatum on the 23rd of April demanding the complete demobilization of the Sardinian army. When it was not heeded, Austria started a war against Sardinia on the 26th of April. The first French troops entered Piedmont on the 25th of April, and France declared war on Austria on the 3rd of May. The French army for the Italian campaign had 170,000 soldiers, 2,000 horsemen, and 312 guns, half of the whole French army. The army, under the command of Napoleon III, divided into 5 corps. The first corps, led by Achille Barraget de Hilliers. The second corps, led by Patrice de Montmong. The third corps, led by François-Certain de Canrobert. The fourth corps, led by Adolphe Niel. And the fifth corps, led by Prince Napoleon Joseph Charles Paul Bonaparte. The Imperial Guard was commanded by Auguste Rigaud de Saint-Jean d'Angely. Napoleon III participated in the war and showed up on the battlefield in the belief that it would motivate the French people during the war. That would prove successful. The Sardinian army had about 70,000 soldiers, 4,000 horsemen and 90 guns. It was divided into 5 divisions, led by Castelbrugo, Manfredo Fanti, Giovanni Durando, Enrico Cialdini and Domenico Cucchiari. To volunteer formations, the Cacciatori degli Alpi and the Cacciatori degli Appennini were also present. It was led by Victor Emmanuel II of Savoy, supported by Alfonso Ferrero La Marmora. The Austrian army fielded more men with 220,000 soldiers, 22,000 horsemen, 824 guns. It was led by Field Marshal Ferenc Graf Goulet. The newly formed United Principalities of Moldavia and Wallachia also supported the Franco-Italian alliance. Their ruler, Alexandru Ioan Cuza, was given 10,000 rifles and ammunition by Napoleon III. With his unwavering and very genuine sympathy, also sent a military mission to Bucharest. Encouraged, Cuza formed a new military camp at Ploiești. As a result, Austria had to keep 30,000 troops in Transylvania, which could ill be spared from Italy. Warfare in this period was characterized by smallish professional armies. Weapons were powerful rifles, some repeating. Cavalry was still in use and limited, but good artillery. This war also saw the first massive military use of railways in order to transport troops at a massive pace in order to gain a swift victory over the enemy. The fires started on April 26th, and Austria was the first to take the offense on the Piedmontese lands. By the 3rd of May, with the French participation, the war became wider, seeing the Latin allies facing the old Habsburg power. After the mobilization of Piedmont troops on the 9th of March 1859, Austria followed suit on the 9th of April and issued an ultimatum demanding the Sardinian demobilization. French troops arrived as well, and with the growing tensions, war ensued on the 26th of April as Austrians advanced in Italian territory with the aim of having a swift victory. The presence of French troops of the infamous Napoleon III led to victory, and the Allied troops marched in Lombardy. In an attempt to hold the lines, the two armies clashed at the Battle of Magenta, one of the biggest of the war. The French army, under Marshal François-Certain Canrobert, moved into Piedmont in the first massive military use of railways, a revolutionary logistic at that time. The Austrian forces counted on a swift victory over the weaker Sardinian army before French forces could arrive in Piedmont. However, Count Goulet, the commander of the Austrian troops in Lombardy, was very cautious and marched around the river Ticino in no specific direction until he crossed it to begin the offensive. Unfortunately for him, very heavy rains began to fall, which allowed the Piedmontese to flood the rice fields in front of his advance and slowed his army's march to a crawl. The Austrians, under Goulet, captured Novara on the 30th of April and Vercelli on the 2nd of May, and advanced on Turin from the 7th of May onward. The Franco-Sardinian moved to strengthen the Alessandria, and Po bridges around Casale Monferrato forced the Austrians to halt their advance on the 9th of May and to fall back on the 10th of May. Napoleon III left Paris on the 10th of May, landed at Genoa on the 12th of May, and arrived in Alessandria on the 14th of May. Ferenc-Guillet, commanding the Austrian Second Army, deployed to the 7th Corps along the Sesia, the 2 and the 3rd Corps at Mortara, the 8th Corps at Pavia, and 5th Corps between Pavia and Mortara. Guillet anticipated a Franco-Piedmontese offensive consisting of a flanking maneuver south of the Po. Marshal Achille Barraget de Hilliers' First Corps advanced from Voghera, while Garibaldi advanced from the north. Guillet assumed they were pressuring his flanks in a maneuver sur la derrière. Napoleon then took the command of the operations of the war, whose first major clash was the Battle of Montebello on the 20th of May, between the Austrian 9th Corps, led by Karl von Urban under the general command of Stadion, and Faury's division part of the French 1st Corps under Marshal de Hilliers. The Austrians retreated after 9 hours of combat when the Sardinian cavalry under de Sonnes arrived, which made Guillet even more cautious. On the 21st of May, Napoleon III received a telegram stating, "The Austrians have attacked, on the 20th, with approximately 15,000 men, the advanced posts of Marshal Barraget de Hilliers. They have been repulsed by Division Faury, which conducted itself admirably and liberated the village of Montebello, already famous." Disconcerted, Guillet deployed his corps further south. Meanwhile, in the north of Lombardy, the Italian volunteers of Giuseppe Garibaldi's Hunters of the Alps defeated the Austrians at Varese and Como, and the Piedmontese French landed 3,000 soldiers and conquered the islands of Lucino and Cres in Dalmatia. After the Piedmontese victory at Palestro, the 30th to the 31st of May 1859, the Austrians finally realized what was happening. Franz Count Guillet decided to retreat east, out of Piedmont and back across the Ticino into Lombardy. His aim was to defend Milan and prevent the Allies from advancing into the Austrian-controlled north of Italy. Guillet had available 68,000 men and 152 guns, composed of the 1st, 2nd, 3rd and 7th Corps. The French had about 50,000 men supported by 89 guns, while Manfredo Fanti added another 12,000. According to Frederick Schneid, General Camus with a division of the Garde Voltigeurs, followed by MacMahon's 2nd Corps and Fanti's 2nd Division, arrived at Turbigo, 5 miles northwest of Magenta, in an attempt to outflank Austrian positions, making the defense of the Naviglio Grande untenable. Camus' division crossed the Ticino by boat between 2 and 3 a.m. on the 4th of June, with the right bank secure. The French laid a pontoon bridge. Camus had crossed the Ticino during the Battle of Turbigo, followed by Montmorong. Camus, Espinas and Montmorong crossed the canal, or bridges at Bernit Ticino and Boffalora sopra Ticino, placing them north of Magenta. At noon, Montmorong encountered elements of Liechtenstein's 2nd Corps. The Imperial Guard Corps made contact with the Austrians from Boffalora to Magenta. At 2 p.m., the Gardes crossed the canal with boats, establishing a bridgehead. Edward Clowngallas informed Guillet of the French attack, who sent Schwarzenberg's 3rd Corps from Robeco sul Naviglio, threatening the French right flank. The confined nature of the country, a vast spread of orchards cut up by streams and irrigation canals, precluded elaborate maneuver. The Austrians turned every house into a miniature fortress. The brunt of the fighting was borne by 5,000 grenadiers of the French Imperial Guard, still mostly in their First Empire style of uniforms. Canrobert arrived in time to reinforce the Guard. From 3:30 through 5:30 p.m., Montmorong launched an attack against the Austrian 1st and 2nd Corps. By 6:30 p.m., the Austrians began a fighting withdrawal, while the French advanced into Magenta and beyond. By 10 p.m., the Austrian Second Army was withdrawing toward Abbiategrasso. In the aftermath of the battle, the Franco-Italian side suffered 4,585 casualties, out of which 707 killed, 3,223 wounded, and also 655 were reported missing. In contrast, the Austrian losses were colossal, with 1,386 dead, 4,358 wounded, and 4,500 missing. In total, there were 10,226 casualties, more than double of the Franco-Sardinian side. The elite corps of the early French Foreign Legion, created in 1831, also took part in this battle and participated in the war in help of the Italian unity. The defeat at the Battle of Magenta on the 5th of June caused Guy to retreat east of the river Mincio to the quadrilateral fortresses, where he was relieved of his post as commander by the Emperor Franz Joseph, who assumed the command himself. On the 8th of June 1859, the combined French-Italian army marched on Milan, taking it, and then a few days later they also conquered Brescia. A dye producing the color magenta was discovered in 1859 and was named after this battle, as was the Boulevard de Magenta in Paris. The Battle of Magenta was not a particularly large battle, but it was a decisive victory for the Franco-Sardinian alliance. Patrice de Mocquemont was created Duke of Magenta for his role in this battle, and would later go on to serve as President of the French Third Republic, created after the fall of Napoleon. After that, the French Sardinian armies moved slowly east in Austrian-controlled Italian territories with the goal of ending the war before the Prussian army could intervene on the side of the Austrians. During the Austrian retreat, Karl von Urban's division, made of 4,000 troops, was tasked to defend the rearguard of an impending enemy attack, while the rest of the army was retreating to Quadrilater. At this juncture, the infamous Garibaldi was relentlessly pursuing the retreating Austrian forces with a formidable contingent that had increased from 3,000 to around 12,000 volunteers, and reinforced by Piedmontese troops of the Brigade Voghera. Urban orchestrated a sequence of events designed to entice Garibaldi into a trap, with an attack on the Italian positions at Traponti, executed by elements of the Ruprecht Brigade. The hunters of the Alps, eager to confront the challenge, took the bait and launched an assault en force against the Division Urban, strategically positioned in proximity to Costanedolo. Having successfully breached the initial Austrian lines of defense, the Italian forces soon found themselves entrapped, surrounded from 3 directions, and subjected to relentless and withering enemy fire. Von Urban had strategically positioned his central forces upon a plateau, in an impregnable fortified semicircular formation. As the Italian forces discovered themselves entrapped within this intricate web, von Urban executed a meticulously coordinated maneuver, ordering an attack in pincers by his right and left flanks. Confronted by this relentless onslaught and entrapped within the tactical scheme, the Italian forces were compelled to retreat in a disorderly rout, retracing their steps in a desperate effort to regain their initial positions. Despite Garibaldi's energetic efforts to quell the rout and reorganize the remnants of his forces for a renewed offensive, his second attack met again with failure, and he was forced to retreat to Brescia. Karl von Urban was appointed the following day as supreme commander over the fortress of Verona, the imperial headquarters. He had already been honored previously by the Emperor Franz Joseph for his performance in the Battle of Montebello. On the next day, Garibaldi received orders to redirect his forces to the north, effectively stopping his pursuit of the main Austrian army, which continued its retreat in an orderly way in the direction of the river Mincio and the Quadrilatero. The Battle of Traponti represents one of the only 2 victories by the Austrians during the Second Italian War of Independence, the other one being the Battle of San Salvatore. Both were won by Field Marshal Lieutenant Karl von Urban. After most of Lombardy was conquered by the French Piedmont armies, the Austrians fell back near the Quadrilateral fortresses, where they prepared a defensive position. After a halt of the French forces, the Austrians thought that it is the right time for a counter-offensive along Schie's River in order to regain their lost positions in the previous months. However, the two armies would accidentally meet at the Battle of Solferino, one of the biggest Europe had seen since the Napoleonic Wars, which would decide the fate of the war and the fate of Italy. In the morning of the 23rd of June, after the arrival of Emperor Franz Joseph, the Austrian army changed direction to counterattack along the river Schie's. At the same time, Napoleon III ordered his troops to advance, causing the battle to occur in an unpredicted location. While the Piedmontese fought the Austrian right wing near San Martino, the French battled to the south of them near Solferino against the main Austrian corps. The Austrian forces were personally led by Emperor Franz Joseph, consisting of the First Army, containing 4 corps 2nd, 3rd, 9th, and 11th under Franz von Wimpfen, and the Second Army, containing 4 corps 1st, 5th, 7th, and 8th under Franz von Schlick. The French army at Solferino, personally led by Napoleon III, was divided in 4 corps, plus the Imperial Guard. Many of its men and generals were veterans of the French conquest of Algeria and the Crimean War, but its commander-in-chief had very limited military experience of note. The Sardinian army had 4 divisions on the field. Although all 3 combatants were commanded by their monarchs, each was seconded by professional soldiers. Marshal Jean-Baptiste Philibert Vaillant served as chief of staff to Napoleon III, while Victor Emmanuel was accompanied by his Minister of War, Lieutenant General Alfonso Ferrero La Marmora. The Austrian High Command was hindered by the rivalry between the Chief of Staff, Heinrich von Hesse, and the Emperor's Adjutant General Karl Ludwig von Brunn. According to the Allied battle plan formulated on the 24th of June, the Franco-Sardinian army moved east to deploy along the right river banks of the Mincio. The French were to occupy the villages of Solferino, Cavriana, Guidizzolo and Modolwith, respectively. The 1st Corps Barrage de Hilliers, 2nd Corps Macmayan, 3rd Corps Canrabat, and 4th Corps Neil. The 4 Sardinian divisions were to take Parzolengo. After marching a few kilometers, the Allies came into contact with the Austrian troops, who had entrenched themselves in those villages. In the absence of a fixed battle plan, the fighting which took place was uncoordinated, which is why so many casualties occurred, and it fell into 3 separate engagements, at Modol South, Solferino Centre, and San Martino North. The battle started at Modol around 4 a.m. Marching towards Guidizzolo, the 4th Corps encountered an Austrian infantry regiment of the Austrian First Army. General Neil immediately decided to engage the enemy and deployed his forces east of Modol. This move prevented the 3 corps of the Austrian First Army from aiding their comrades of the Second Army near Solferino, where the main French attacks took place. The French forces were numerically inferior to the Austrians. The 4th Corps contained 3 infantry divisions under Deluzzi, Vinoy and Faili, and a cavalry brigade. Neil, holding a thin line of 5 kilometers in length, was able to stop the Austrian assault on his position by ably warding off attacks and counter-attacking at opportune moments. Around 4:30 a.m., the advance guard of the 1st Corps, 3 infantry divisions under Faury, de Ladmiro and Balzain, and a cavalry division under Desvaux came into contact with the Austrian, the 5th Corps under Stadion near Castiglione del Stiviere. Around 5 a.m. 2nd Corps under MacMahon, 2 infantry divisions, and a cavalry brigade under Larmdruge, Decon, and Godin encountered Hungarian units posted near Camarino. The Austrian forces were 3 corps strong and positioned on the towns of Solferino, Cavriana, and Volta Mantovana. The Austrians were able to hold these positions all day against repeated French attacks. On the northern side of the battlefield, the Sardinians, 4 divisions strong, encountered the Austrians around 7 a.m. A long battle erupted over control of Pozzolengo, San Martino, and Medana della Scoperta. The Austrian 8th Corps under Benedict had 39,000 men and 80 guns, and was repeatedly attacked by a Sardinian force of 22,000 men with 48 guns. Looking south, according to Schneid, by early afternoon, the Austrian attack had failed, and Neil pushed beyond Robeco and Corsa Nova halfway to Guidizzolo. At 3 p.m. General Renault's division of Canrobert's 3rd Corps arrived at Robeco. Neil, now reinforced, launched a coordinated attack on Guidizzolo. However, the arrival of the Austrian 3rd and 11th Corps stopped the French assault, and after 2 hours, Neil withdrew. In the centre, Stadium received reinforcements from Clamgalla's 1st Corps, but Napoleon III fed the Imperial Guard divisions into the combat, and by 2 p.m. the cemetery and town were surrounded. Near 3 p.m. the French reserves, formed by Canrobert's 3rd Corps and the Imperial Guard under Ignat, attacked Cavriana, which was defended by the Austrian 1st Corps under Clamgallas, finally occupying it at 6 p.m. and thereby breaking through the Austrian centre. This breakthrough forced a general retreat of both Austrian armies. To the north, the Austrians were able to ward off 3 Sardinian attacks, inflicting heavy losses upon the attackers. At the end of the day, Benedict was ordered to retreat with the rest of the Austrian army, but ignored the order and kept resisting. At 8 p.m. a 4th Sardinian assault finally captured the contested hills, and Benedict withdrew. The main Sardinian contribution in the overall battle consisted in keeping Benedict's corps deeply engaged throughout the day and preventing the sending of 2 brigades as reinforcement to the force attacked by the French in Solferino. The battle was a particularly grueling one, lasting over 9 hours and resulting in over 2,386 Austrian troops killed, with 10,807 wounded and 8,638 missing or captured. The Allied armies also suffered a total of 2,492 killed, 12,512 wounded, and 2,922 captured or missing. Reports of wounded and dying soldiers being shot or bayoneted on both sides added to the horror. In the end, the Austrian forces were forced to yield their positions, and the Allied French Piedmontese armies won a tactical, but costly, victory. The Austrians retreated to the 4 fortresses of the Quadrilateral, and the campaign essentially ended. The battle led the Swiss Jean-Henri Dunant to write his book A Memory of Solferino. Although he did not witness the battle, his statement is contained in an unpublished page included in the 1939 English edition, published by the American Red Cross. He toured the field following the battle and was greatly moved by what he saw. Horrified by the suffering of wounded soldiers left on the battlefield, Dunant set about a process that led to the Geneva Conventions and the establishment of the International Red Cross. After the Battle of Solferino, a ceasefire was agreed on the 8th of July. The 2 emperors met on the 11th of July at Villafranca di Verona, and the armistice was signed on the following day, the Peace of Villafranca. Napoleon III signed the armistice with Austria at Villafranca for a combination of reasons. The Austrians had retreated to the Quadrilateral, which would be very costly to overrun. His absence in France had made the country vulnerable to attack. His actions in Italy were being criticized in France. He did not want Cavour and Piedmont to gain too much power, mostly at the expense of his men. He also feared involvement of the German states. Most of Lombardy with its capital, Milan, excluding only the Austrian fortresses of Mantua and Legnogo and the surrounding territory, was transferred from Austria to France, which would immediately cede the territories to Sardinia. The rulers of central Italy, who had been expelled by revolution shortly after the beginning of the war, were to be restored. The agreement, made by Napoleon behind the backs of his Sardinian allies, led to great outrage in Piedmont, Sardinia, and Cavour resigned in protest. However, the Villafranca terms never took effect, although they were reaffirmed by the final Treaty of Zurich in the 11th of November. The agreement had become a dead letter. The central Italian states were occupied by Piedmont, which would not restore the previous rulers, and France was unwilling to force them to do so. The Austrians were left to look on in frustration at the French failure to carry out the terms of the treaty. Austria had emerged triumphant after the suppression of liberal movements in 1849, but its status as a great power on the European scene was now seriously challenged, and its influence in Italy severely weakened. As such, on the 22nd of March 1860, with French and British approval, the United Provinces of Central Italy, including the Duchy of Parma, Duchy of Modena, Grand Duchy of Tuscany, and part of the Papal States, were annexed by the Kingdom of Sardinia, and France took its deferred rewards of Savoy and Nice. This latter move was vehemently opposed by Italian national hero Garibaldi, a native of Nice, and directly led to Garibaldi's expedition to Sicily, which would complete the preliminary unification of Italy. The annexation of Nice to France caused the Nicid Exodus, or the emigration of a quarter of the Nicid Italians to Italy, and the Nicid Vespers. During the war, Prussia also mobilized 132,000 men, but never joined the fighting. The weaknesses laid bare during the mobilization of the Prussian army to initiate military reforms. These reforms were the basis for Prussia's rapid victories over Austria in 1866 and France in 1872-71, which led to a united Germany under Prussian dominance.